All right, welcome to our April edition of Extension Hot Topics. We welcome those back who have been with us before. First time comers, we're glad to have you. My name is Jeff Shorgen with Purdue Extension. I'm stationed in Wabash County, and then the other leader in this, you want to introduce yourself?
Courtney Schmidt, Miami County Ag and Natural Resources and Health and Human Sciences Extension Educator.
So, our Hot Topics programs, just many of you have heard this. We like to highlight our different specialists at Purdue and around the state. Today, we are very happy to have Amy Thompson with us. I do not want to take too much of your time, Amy. So, we're going to just make sure if everyone can make sure that they're muted, I think you're muted automatically. If you have questions throughout the presentation, throw those in the chat box and we will field those. Amy, if you want to kind of give your little introduction and get started, the time is yours.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. Yes, so Amy Thompson, and as you can see on that slide there, my title currently is Beginning Farmer Coordinator. But I spent 20 plus years as a county educator in Monroe County, and that's where I'm at today. And during that time, and pretty much always through my life, I've loved Indiana native plants. I remember mushroom hunting with my father and being fascinated by May-apples as a kid. So this has been a passion of mine for a long time. I am not a botanist. There are probably people on the call that know a lot more about native plants than I do, but we're going to talk about using native plants in our landscapes. Um, if you do have questions, as Jeff said, please put them in the chat, or if you have comments or different experiences that I'm going to talk about, please feel free to share those as well. My experience is in Southern Indiana, not so much in Northern Indiana. So Northern Indiana folks, if you have comments you want to share about any of the plants I have chosen to include or not, feel free. So real quick, why choose native plants for your garden? To me, one of the big reasons is they represent Indiana. I was born and raised in Bloomington, moved away for 20 plus years, and I missed our four seasons. I missed the beautiful spring wildflowers we have, the amazing fall colors. So just the fact that they're from here and not from some other place makes me love them. And saying that, I will say I'm not a native plant purist. I have all kinds of non-native ornamentals in my landscape as well. But native plants are adapted to local climate and soil conditions. Oops, I'm moving the wrong slides. There we go. Typically require less inputs in general. Once established, they can often survive with lower water, in addition to, no fertilizer, minimal pesticides, if any. They're supporting our native wildlife populations. Lots of them support all kinds of different insects, which support the butterflies and birds and whatnot. So just in general, as that last bullet said, supporting land stewardship of Indiana's native heritage, and a land ethic is important to me. So I'm going to work through, the way I'm going to work through the presentation is give you some sun-loving things, some shade-loving perennials you might want to incorporate into your landscape. And then I'm also hopefully going to get to some resources at the end. If we don't get to those, hopefully Courtney can send them out to you after the program. I will say one great resource, which thought I had a slide plugged in here right at the beginning, that I hope you are already aware of, but if you are not, we have a publication called Indiana Native Plants for Pollinators. And hopefully one of my colleagues can stick a link in the chat about that publication, but it is a great reference. Helps you know when flower, the size and shape of a flower, when it blooms, what conditions it's adapted to, and then also what pollinators it attracts. So, on to some sun-loving things. So, when we say sun-loving, we're talking about at least 6 hours of direct sunlight daily. Um, Most prefer well-drained soils, although if you do have a wetter yard, there are a number of plants that can tolerate wet conditions, native plants that do well and actually provide a lot of color in native plantings. So those are some options as well. Maintenance. Um, Sometimes people have the perception that native gardens are maintenance free. That is definitely not true. You'll still have to do weeding. I've got grass all over the place, henbit and purple dead nettle and bed straw all coming up all over the place right now in my native beds. So maintenance is still a thing. Can be less for sure, depending on what you're willing to tolerate, what kind of look you're willing to tolerate. So, one of the sun lovers that blooms relatively early is spiderwort. It has uh, a couple different varieties in Indiana. There's a purple variety that you see here. There's more also of a fuchsia variety. It has somewhat German iris-like leaves. So the foliage is attractive as well, and the blooms last a significant time. So that's one of the reasons I enjoy having it in my garden. Southern blue flag iris is another one that I have in my garden. Typically, it is found in wetter soils, but I actually have it on a higher point in my yard, and it has done quite well. And in fact, has spread quite a bit over this past winter. Um, People will also talk about northern blue flag iris. Southern is the one that is actually the native to Indiana, or most of Indiana anyway. Northern is further north in Michigan typically, but a really attractive plant. The iris leaves are very similar to German iris, which many of us are familiar with. The blooms are a little more delicate looking, but really attractive and just a really nice addition to a sunny spot in your garden. Butterfly weed is, of course, a classic attractant of monarch butterflies, both for the nectar on the blooms and for the larvae to feed on. This one tolerates a wide range of soils. Not super wet, but moist soils for sure, and dry soils as well. This one does not particularly transplant well because it does have a deep taproot. I have transplanted some from my pasture into my yard, but the whole was a whole lot more effort than I would want to put in on a regular basis. And you can start it easily from seed. The seed does need to be stratified, meaning that it needs a cool, moist period in order to germinate. But that cool, moist period can be provided by Mother Nature, whether that is just by spreading the seed in the fall where you want it to grow and letting it overwinter there in the soil, or doing winter sowing in the milk jugs. You can get them started that way. But forms really attractive clumps, blooms for a really long period, and as I already mentioned, big attractant to monarchs, but also other kind of nectar seeking insects as well.
Hey, Amy.
Yes, sir.
So I attended the Indiana Native Plant Society.
Yep.
Have you heard about the initiative where they're trying to get the butterfly weed to be the state flower of Indiana instead of the peony, or did I dream that up?
No, Indiana Native Plant Society, if you're not a member, it is a great organization to belong to. They do a quarterly newsletter. Jeff mentioned he went to their annual conference, um, which was up north last year, I think Fort Wayne, but they have it in the fall every year. It's a great learning opportunity. And they do a number of different efforts, including attempting to make our legislature adopt um, butterfly weed as an Indiana native plant. They actually took a vote from members on that, I believe. I believe I remember voting. Anyway, um, at this point, I don't think that's moved forward. But it is an ongoing effort on their part. Peony, I love them, have lots of them, but they are native to China. And, talking about our Indiana native heritage and the land stewardship part, besides ants, I don't think a whole lot of potential pollinators are interested in peonies. So yes, you did not dream that. That was a reality, and I think an ongoing reality in coming years. I rambled too much, but one little other fun fact about that, peony has not been our state flower forever. It was actually zinnia before that. At some point they changed it to the peony, and now this effort, um, hopefully to change it to an Indiana native plant.
Thank you, Amy. We did have a question pop up. How invasive are they? I'm not sure if that individual was talking about butterfly weed or peonies, but any thoughts on that?
Invasive has a specific definition. Invasive would be a non-native plant that is causing economic, environmental, or damage to human health. We have lots of plants in our garden that I might label aggressive, which means they spread and you have to work with them to keep them where you want to be. And butterfly weed does spread. I wouldn't say that I find it spreading in my garden beds, but I do find it spreading in my pasture. And it is actually toxic to livestock. They thankfully mostly leave it alone, but something to think about. But I wouldn't call butterfly weed an aggressive plant. If others have different experiences, like I said, feel free to chime in the chat. Swamp milkweed. So we actually have 13 native species of milkweed in Indiana. And I'm not going to talk about all of them. We don't have time, but I do love swamp milkweed. I love the color, the sort of light pink, mauve color. Is stunning, I think. And it also has a lovely fragrance. I'm not too familiar with too many native plants that have as much fragrance as swamp milkweed does. Now, as the name implies, it does like wetter soils. I have had it in a dry spot and it did, we'll say survive, but it did not thrive. And again, full sun. So a wet spot with full sun, if you have one of those in your garden, this would be a great spot for swamp milkweed. It's also known as marsh milkweed, rose milkweed. And if you haven't taken a sniff of it, the next time you come across one, do take a smell.
Hey,
Um,
Amy.
yes,
Oh,
sir.
sorry, we had a good, you were kind of touching on it with the wet spots. Root structures. The question was, is swamp milkweed good for preventing soil erosion along a pond shore? Any experiences with that?
Um, I would not, I don't have a pond, so I don't have any personal experiences with that. I do not believe it has a super fibrous root system. Um, There may be other things that might be better choices, but I would say the best choice would probably be a mixture of plants, which could include swamp milkweed, as far as, creating wildlife habitat. A mixture supports a variety of diverse species. So some of our native grasses can also tolerate wet soils. So those might be, part of your strategy for your pond area. Um, all right. Dense blazing star. There are a couple different types of blazing star. It's also known as gay feather in Indiana. This one likes moist to wet soils, but it also can do well in well-drained sites. That's another thing
Hey,
about.
Amy, I'm so sorry. The slide didn't advance. I keep interrupting
Oh,
you. I'm sorry.
you're fine. Whoops. And now it advanced too far. Um,
Cool. We're good.
My setup is not the best, so I apologize for that. Anyway, this is dense blazing star, also known as gay feather. It's actually used in the floral trade, so you may have received it as a cut flower in a bouquet from a florist. And one reason for that is that, in addition to being a great attractor of butterflies and other types of pollinators, it has a really long vase life. Um, Under the right conditions, this one, which would typically be more moist soils, this one will spread a little bit, but the purple is really striking, as is the flower form. So it's a really nice addition to your garden. This is a picture from White River Gardens from some time ago. It's part of the zoo now. I admittedly have not been there in a long time. But it's one that you might want to use at the back of a bed or border, because it can get relatively tall, 2 to 4 feet tall. Sort of depends, of course, on what else you're planting with it, but you need to think about the placement a little bit. This is pink turtlehead. It is a host to, as you can see, it is a host to Baltimore checkered spot, I believe, is the name of that butterfly. It's very eye-catching. It blooms later in the year, um, starts probably late July, and blooms through August. I have this in a rain garden at my property here in Bloomington, and it does form a nice dense clump like this of plants, spreads a little bit, but in moist soils. And I don't have experience trying to grow this one in more drier sites. If somebody else does, please share your experience. Turtlehead, the name comes from the shape of the flower. Looks like, hopefully you can see, imagine a turtle head there. You do occasionally run into white ones as well. So that is also an option, depending on what kind of color you want to add. Sometimes it does flop a little bit depending on how much water it's gotten. So some of those plant supports, like you might put around a peony patch, since we were talking about peonies, might be helpful with your pink turtle head as well.
Amy, as you switch over, I've had good success with turtle heads in the shade. They've done surprisingly well in the shade as well. Um, and then we did have another question. I want to thank you guys for throwing these questions in the chat. The blazing star, in terms of wind damage and getting blown over with that stalk, are they pretty hardy, or what have you got on that?
They can flop as well. It'll depend on the growing conditions. Um, things tend to flop when they've gotten too much water. Um, but if they're particularly happy and growing really tall, staking is always an option, just to keep them supported. But they will definitely flop if on occasion. If you have a particularly windy spot, I would probably plan on staking them. So obedient plant is a really fun one, I think. It tends to be found naturally in more wet sites. I have very limited access to wet soils on my property, so mine is actually on a very dry hill, and does very well from year to year. People do talk about obedient plant being aggressive in the garden, and I have not found that at all on my dry site, but I believe under wetter conditions, it can be, it readily spreads. But it flowers later in the summer, great color in the summer. Um, Mine, again, on a drier site, probably grows to a foot and a half. It'll get taller on wetter sites. The name obedient plant comes from the fact that if you pinched one of those individual blooms you see there and twisted it, supposedly the bloom stays in that spot where you put it. There's a white variety of this as well, and all kinds of bee activity on this one when it is blooming um, later in the year. So this is goldenrod, and a lot of times people think of goldenrod as a weed. Um, but goldenrod supports, there's several different kinds. I'm not going to talk about that many of them, maybe just one in fact, but um, they support all kinds of late season pollinators, not only with nectar, but also pollen collectors and that kind of thing. Uh, they You can see right here, these are a type of blue-winged moss. And these guys are actually solitary wasps that are predators of Japanese beetles. So these guys bore into the soil and parasitize Japanese beetle larvae underground. They're good guys to have in the garden. Lots of good guys to have in the garden, even if some maybe are not quite as attractive, because obviously these guys look very similar to a wasp, and people are often afraid of anything that looks like it belongs to that family. But stiff goldenrod, um, hang on just one second. My computer is being weird. It likes full sun, can tolerate light shade. I have it again in a drier spot. I have a lot of my house is up on a hill, so I have a lot of dry soils. Um, it has a rhizome. This one is relatively easily transplanted, can grow to 3 to 5 feet tall. This one does flop in my garden, and I would also say I do have an occasional pest problem with it, which is head clipping weevil. Um, Head clipping weevil is a weevil, so it's got a long little snout on it. And what head clipping weevil does is it sort of cuts around a circle around 90% of the stem. And then that little tag that's held on, the bloom flops over. So you'll see a lot of dead blooms flop over. It happens in purple coneflower relatively often as well. But beyond that, beyond the occasional flop and the head clipping weevil, it's a great addition, beautiful yellow color in the fall. And I would say the head clipping weevil problem is probably my fault more than anything else. The eggs for that species overwinter in those heads as they drop to the ground. So if you do good garden sanitation, good cleanup, you can lessen that problem significantly. Goldenrods are often accused of causing allergies, and people stay away from them for that reason. Um, but really, that's often giant ragweed is the bigger culprit, which is also an Indiana native plant, but I will not be promoting that one. Doesn't have the pretty color and does cause lots of allergy problems. Um, I had one more goldenrod. Oh, Canada goldenrod, I mentioned. That's the one you most oftenly see in pastures and sort of abandoned areas. Abandoned areas if they haven't been taken over by cattle repair. But Canada goldenrod is pretty weedy and will spread very readily. This stiff goldenrod does not. New England aster. This one is tolerant of a wide range of soils, and can also tolerate some light shade, does better in full sun. Um, it has ray flowers, so the interior, unlike a mum, if you think of a chrysanthemum, um, asters are a better choice for pollinators than mums because the disc in the middle is where all the pollen is located on an aster. A mum does not have that, so they don't provide that pollen and nectar source to pollinators late in the season. This one can grow up to 5 feet tall if it's really happy. There is a cultivar called Purple Dome that has really intense color and is sort of a low mound, only probably a foot tall. We have the Purple Dome in the demonstration garden outside the Hort building at um, on campus at Purdue, and it's just really beautiful, and someday I'm going to get that for my own garden. I do have New England aster, but most of mine get pretty tall, so some lower growing ones would be a nice addition. Blue mist flower is another one that typically blooms in the fall. And typically I've found it in wet sites. I've found it in dry sites. It can tolerate wet sites, so it can be a good rain garden plant. If you're trying to grow it from seed, as do many of these perennials, they'll take a year or two to actually produce bloom. Um, they have to reach maturity, of course, before they actually bloom. But it does, the mist part of it, it does sort of create a ethereal type of feeling with the shape of the flowers. But it's nice that it does tolerate such a wide range of sites. You do have to occasionally thin this one out, or its bloom production will decrease. And that's true for a lot of these. Thinning them over time, dividing them, if you see a decrease in bloom intensity or frequency can be helpful. Um, this one is another one that I believe is toxic to livestock, so you wouldn't want it in your um, pasture necessarily, but in Monroe County, we have had a native garden on the courthouse square for probably 15 years, and this was a really nice addition to that garden for a long time. We'll have to see how that comes back this year. We had a giant pin oak come down in a storm last year, and in the tree cleanup, our native garden got pretty hammered. So in general, it will be interesting to see what all comes back from that. Any comments or questions about any of those sun-loving plants
We're
that
looking
I...
pretty we're looking pretty good right now.
Okay, sounds good. I'll go ahead and move on to shade-loving plants. Um, I will say I'm happy to stay on and answer questions at the end. Um, just throwing that out there. So shade-loving plants, um, they prefer either dappled light or even full shade. Most do best if they have less than 4 hours of direct sunlight daily. If they get too much sun, they won't thrive. Basically, they can show scorch and damage to their leaves, may die out over time. Um, some do tolerate dry shade. Most of them are most plants can prefer in general consistently moist soils, especially providing adequate water during establishment is important. Um, Some of these will also self-seed. One of our shade-loving grasses, which I do have a slide for in here down the road if we get to grasses, is northern sea oats, and it's one that spreads quite a bit. Wild ginger is a nice ground cover. Very common woodland plant, and it's great for shady ground cover. One of the reasons I picked the plants that I did is that most of them are available in the commercial trade. There are lots and lots of native plants, and they have become much more available over my time being interested in native plants when I first started in Monroe County. Um, Back in 2006 as the county extension educator. We had one nursery that had very limited supply. And now, um, uh, most plant nurseries do carry at least some natives, some specialize in natives. The Indiana Native Plant Society has a list of where you can buy native plants, and that list uh, is a sort of a sure thing, I would say. With some of the other commercial nurseries, it's a little more hit and miss. But wild ginger is one that you can find in commercial trade pretty easily. There is an Asian version that is also available. So if you, are looking for Indiana natives, make sure you get the Indiana native and not the Asian cousin. The Asian cousin has pretty much the same leaf shape, but the leaves are much shinier. We got a big picture of the bloom right there. And I have not been out in the woods yet this year, I am sad to say. So I'm not sure. We may have some blooms already. But it's not a showy bloom. It's interesting looking. Obviously, you can see it there. But it's near the base of the plant. So we're definitely not growing this one for its blooms. You have to lift up the leaves to actually see it. Um, but the heart-shaped leaves really do add a nice element of interest to your garden. This ginger is not related to culinary ginger. That's a very different looking tropical plant. But this ginger, if you dig it up and smell the roots, it does have uh, a ginger fragrance. It's not something you would smell just looking at the plant or, yeah, being around the plant. You'd have to smell the root.
Hey Amy, quick question in the chat box was does the flower smell bad for this one? For the wild or for the ginger, does the flower smell bad?
Not in my experience, but I will say I was not blessed with good olfactory senses. Um, and the sense of smell varies wildly. So some can smell badly. Um, a lot of the dark colored flowers, such as wild ginger, are pollinated by things that I'm thinking of like pawpaw flowers, which has sort of the same color flower. They're pollinated, pawpaw flowers are pollinated by carrion flies, and they're said to have an odor as well. And I cannot smell pawpaw flowers either. Um, so to each their own nose, I guess, as far as smell goes, because also my father, we used to drive down the road and he would love it when a dead skunk with smell would come up. He said it cleared out his sinuses. I never appreciated it. Anyway, wild columbine. There are lots of non-Indiana native columbine colors available. But this is what our Indiana native columbine looks like. This is a nice one. One, it has really, interesting sort of trumpet-shaped flowers. It's a great garden plant. It does tolerate a wide range of soil and sun types as well. Begins blooming early. If you don't have columbine blooming now, you have it in your garden, hopefully you will soon, especially with the warmer temperatures that we're going to get. this weekend, at least down my way. They're one of the earliest flowers to provide nectar for bees, butterflies, and hummingbirds. Um, I'm curious also if anybody has seen any hummingbirds. I'd love to know about that in the chat. I've got my hummingbird feeder out, but I haven't seen any yet. The seeds do, they form a little capsule seed pod, and this one does spread relatively readily. So you'll see columbines pop up all over the place where you never thought you'd have a columbine, which is sort of a nice garden surprise, in my opinion. But I also am not a, giant, perfectly groomed garden advocate. I like a little wildness to my garden. They're easy to pull up if you don't like them. And they're also easy to share with your neighbors. They transplant very, very easily. The one common problem that columbine get is leaf miner, which is a tiny little insect that gets in between the layers of the leaves and eats out plant material. So it'll almost look like there's a little slug trail through your columbine leaf, like somebody's been doing a dance on top of the leaf. But that's nothing on top, that's actually between the leaf layers. If your plant gets heavily damaged, you can actually cut the foliage back and the foliage will regrow. These guys are pretty tough. I need to go faster. Um, Wild geranium. This one again, another one it likes part shade best, but it will tolerate full sun as long as you give it sufficient moisture. It grows into a really pretty mound, about a foot tall. This one is used quite a bit in commercial landscaping, so you're likely to find this one available in your more run-of-the-mill kind of stores. So easy to access this plant for sure. Um, they're easy to grow from seed as well. Um, Sometimes the foliage looks less than great in the hotter, drier part of the year. You can cut it back just like you could the columbine, and it will regrow. But really pretty flowers, and again, supporting pollinators. Whoops, I went the wrong way. Sorry. Virginia bluebells. How many of you have bluebells in your garden now? I do, and they're so lovely. I appreciate them so much. In nature, you'll find them typically along creek sides and wetter areas, and they readily spread in those type of areas. I have two different clumps in my landscape up here. One is on a relatively dry, shady spot, and one is gets quite a bit more sun, but more moisture, and both are doing very well. I love that they start out sort of pink and turn blue. Um, there's really not a lot of insect or disease issues with them. Rabbits don't like them, which is always a, a bonus. They will also grow under black walnut. So another bonus with them. But they're just I love having them in the garden because they um, add to the feeling of spring coming around. So I have two different, oops, advance your slides. Two different lobelias here. I have great blue lobelia right here. Hopefully you can see my cursor on that one. And then also over here. And then this is cardinal flower, which is also a lobelia. These typically are found in wet environments. Uh, Low wooded areas. They form clumps. The one thing about them in a home garden is they're not particularly long-lived plants. They're sort of a short-lived perennial. If they're growing in those wet conditions that they like, they will readily reseed. But if they're not super happy, you may have them die out after a couple of seasons. We had the cardinal flower or the red lobelia on the courthouse square for a while, and it was so stunning. But it was not super happy there and um, died out and has not been replaced. The blue lobelia, I actually have it in a bed close to my house near a drain spout. And it's very happy. And in fact, as I mentioned, spreads quite a bit. But butterflies like this one, hummingbirds as well. So, and again, no serious insect or disease issues that I'm aware of. It can occasionally get powdery mildew depending on the environmental conditions or growing conditions, but powdery mildew, I just sort of consider it and move on. It's not impacting plant health significantly. This is another one that I should say, not significantly impacting plant health in that case. Sometimes it can on different species, but celandine poppy or wood poppy. This one is just the ones I've seen are just starting to bloom down here. This one is a one that will spread. I've heard people complain about maybe it being aggressive in the garden. I have not had that experience. Um, in nature, again, it would be found in wetter spots. I have it in a drier spot, so it's not quite as happy, so it doesn't spread as much. But again, if you do have spreaders, you can pop out seedlings and share them with your other native plant enthusiasts. It has, interesting shaped leaves, lovely yellow color. It's just another really nice addition to your garden. Sweet Joe pieweed is a pieweed that will tolerate some shade, which is a bonus, and it also although it does get tall, it does as tall as some of the other pieweeds do. So, but this one it has dome shaped light purple or mauve colored flowers. Probably June, July, August blooming time frame, blooms for a long time. A big nectar plant for monarchs, swallowtails, many other butterflies. I have a little patch in my rain garden, and every time I drive by, just swarmed with butterflies. So it's one of my favorites for sure. And there are some other Joe Pye weeds out there. I mentioned that POL6 publication that talks a lot about the different varieties and where they fit and the size they grow to. They also Indiana Native Plant Society also has really good resources related to using native plants in the landscape. Switching a little bit of gear to ferns. This is ostrich fern, named after its ostrich-shaped leaves. This one is not in POL6, but I wanted to include a couple fern options because they're great additions to the landscape. Um, this one grows in average or medium soils. It prefers part to full shade. Um, it can't really dry out. It will die back if dried out. The fiddleheads on this one are edible. It's one that foragers seek out. And it's just, like I said, a nice addition. If you have a shady spot with regular moisture, it might be a spot for an ostrich fern. Maidenhair fern is one of my favorites. Also, I love how delicate it looks and how dark the stems are. The stems are almost black, which I think makes it stand out as well. This one, it can be a nice combo with wild geranium. This one is deer resistant as well, as is the ostrich fern. You often see this one in nature in on slopes or ravines. It will go dormant if there's not enough moisture. So uh, it's one that, you need to plan the spot for well, right plant, right place, as we often talk about if you've been to any other Purdue extension programs. But it's a really unique flower or leaf shape compared to many other native plants available. Okay, we got about 15 minutes. I am going to talk quickly about some native grasses. Native grasses are a great addition to our Indiana landscapes. Most of them do prefer full sun. Would say they're a great addition and they're a better choice than most of the non-native ornamentals available. A lot of them, Miscanthus family, as well as others, are becoming recognized as being invasive. And we have lots of native grass choices to pick from. Grasses will flop if they are overwatered or if even Mother Nature gets aggressive with her precipitation. Um, so, you can sort of time up. I just deal with the flopping. Um, If you haven't trimmed your native grasses back at this point in the spring, now would be a good time. The grass will still grow, but it just has a more sort of intentional um, look if you trim back last year's grass. Um, they do provide winter interest, so I leave them over winter and then trim back in the spring. They grow most actively when the weather is cool. Um, a lot of them do. Some of them grow when they're hot. Bottlebrush grass, we just left maidenhair fern. Bottlebrush grass has a unique seed head that can add some different interest um, to your landscape. This is a cool season grass, so it grows when the temperatures are cooler, provides some visual interest to shady areas. Um, the flower heads will mature and turn brown and sort of remain present, so they add a long-term interest to your garden. Once established, it's tolerant of drought, helps with erosion control. The grasses can be beneficial for air pollution control as well. And this one also is tolerant of black walnut, so you can plant it in that area. Northern sea oats is one I mentioned as maybe being slightly aggressive, also known as river oats. Um, and I'm sorry, I think this has happened several times that my picture has covered the scientific name. I thought I had fixed that, but anyway, northern sea oats, they have a really interesting seed head again. People describe it as sort of like a bunch of fish that you've caught hanging off a string, and you can hopefully maybe envision that a little bit. But this one does well in dry shade. Not a ton of things grow in dry shade, but river oats will, and in fact, will spread in dry shade via the seed heads. So if you've got it spreading too much, do some deadheading late in the season. The seed heads are actually used in dried arrangements as well. So deadheaded and put some in a vase without any water, and you can have a pretty little arrangement there for a while. Switchgrass. It's a vigorous perennial. It's one that also can sometimes be a little aggressive. Grows 3 to 4 feet tall, but can get taller. And this one is a warm season grass, so grows when the temperatures are warm. It is clump forming. River oats or northern sea oats is not. They sort of spread all over the place, not clump forming. You can see sort of the purplish tinge of the tips of the leaves, and then also the seed heads on switchgrass, which can add some visual interest um, to your garden. This one also, the deer are generally not interested in, and it can also tolerate salty conditions well. So if you have a sidewalk or driveway maybe where salt gets laid down, this one might be an option. Big blue stem is a prairie grass, but will grow on a wide variety of soil conditions. It does get rather tall. Oops, I'm on little blue stem. I'm sorry. Maybe I skipped big blue stem this time. But the blue stem part of it comes from sort of a blue or gray cast that the grass actually has a color to it. And it does not get as tall as big blue stem. It only gets 2 to 4 feet tall. Slender, flat green leaves. You can see a fall picture here, so it does have some fall color and adds some interest in that way. My favorite Indiana native grass is Indian grass, and this one does get pretty tall. I'd say 5 feet tall on average. It does have an upright clumping form, blue-green foliage. What I love about it in the fall, um, one, the foliage turns an orange-yellow color, and the seed heads, um, the panicles turn uh, a goldish color. The pollen turns a goldish color there, and it's just really, really, I think it's beautiful. And the fact that it's tall, you can also almost use it as a barrier if you're looking for a barrier plant between you and a neighbor, or to hide your garbage cans or something like that. Provides not only that interest in the summer, the color in the fall, and then remains erect for much of the winter. It does need to be trimmed back like the other grasses I mentioned. This one tolerates drought well. It does flop if it gets too much water, though. Prairie dropseed is another one, and the last grass I'm going to talk about. Prairie dropseed, a couple attractive things about it that I like, and reasons I included in my landscape is, one, it tolerates a wide variety of soils, and it does tolerate some shade. It's lower growing, which is nice, and has very fine foliage, as you can see here in these photos. If you plant it in a big clump, as you can see on the photo against the wall, and you get any wind, it almost looks like waves blowing on the ocean. So I love it for that reason. And then I love it has a really nice coppery color in the fall. Intensity varies a little bit on the color from year to year, depending on the growing season that it's been through, but I do think it's a really great addition. It's a slow grower, but you can divide it easily. All of these grasses obviously can be divided easily. Indian grass, little blue stem. So although it may not spread quickly on its own, you can have more plants in a relatively short amount of time via division. I do have some native trees and shrubs to talk about, but I've run out of time. Maybe Courtney and Jeff will ask me back next year, and I can do a whole one on native trees and shrubs. I do want to skip to some resources real quick, however. Let me get there. Sorry.
As you're doing that, yeah, Amy, the first thing I thought was, hey, what's your plans for next year?
Well, I love talking about native plants. Like I said, there's plenty of people who know more than me, likely, but I do have a passion for them for sure. So this is the POL 6 You can see the number up here. If you Google POL6 and Purdue, it should come up. And this is the cover page, but behind that are lots of charts about different plants and how you can add them to your landscape when they will bloom, etc. I personally think it's easier to look at on the web than it is to print. Some other resources. There's a Buy Natives directory I mentioned through the Indiana Native Plant Society. There's invasive plants and their lookalikes website, because some of them can be a little tricky. And then finally, some other resources. Missouri Botanic Garden is always a great resource. North Carolina Extension Gardener Plant Toolbox is one that I use pretty frequently. But Indiana Native Plant Society, I would say, beyond the POL 6, are the two I go to most often for resources related to Indiana native plants. And like I said, I'm happy to stay on and try and answer questions or chat in whatever way with folks at this point.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being here, Amy. I'm going to go ahead and put the post-program survey in the chat box. And as that goes up, thanks everyone for stopping out. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.